Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. So I hear you're back from the brink.
Back from the brink, yes.
Very good. Glad to hear it.
I hear you get a month or so. How you doing? That's good. That's good. Good to see you. Oh, I get more goodies every time I come. I get goodies.
What's that?
Oh, no, a test? I don't know if I will.
No, not a test. Don't worry.
No, not at all. We're not gonna take a test, right?
Nope, no tests. You're okay. Printed out about enough, one per party. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening. How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. Hi.
Hello, hello.
How are y'all doing?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Hello.
Did I give you these?
Yeah, sure.
Did I yet?
No.
I didn't?
Oh, I thought you said, could I give this to you? Yes, you may, thank you.
All right. She's not.
Okay. You wouldn't have any idea where the DVD is for the kids. Well, she gave it to me, but it's only 1 to 4. And I'm lesson 5. That DVD you gave me was just lessons 1 to 4. And I'm lesson 5.
No, you're lesson 4.
We
We're
got backed
back
up by a
one.
week.
Oh, I never heard that.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
sorry. I didn't even think to say anything to you. I thought you were in talking to Amber.
I did not print out anything. I printed everything for 5. I put everything for 5.
Well, you know what? If you just, I mean,
Do
it
you want me to
basically
just
talks.
use the DVD to do 4 then?
I was
and
gonna
then I
say,
won't
it
have an
basically moves
activity
it
on?
through. Just come up with, they like playing tag. We played tunnel tag last time. Like,
Okay.
you know, you've
Okay.
got space
Okay.
out there.
The fun keeps them coming back. That's what I hear.
What?
The fun keeps them coming back.
Oh, I don't know.
They just
What
like-
I am tonight.
I mean,
That's for y'all.
like,
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
Evening.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I looked at what the dates were, and I just counted, and I was like, oh, okay, okay. I'm right on the side. I can't write on it.
I printed enough to like 1 per group, kind of. Is that okay? Okay. Do y'all need a second here? Okay. Okay. Good evening. How are you?
Doing very well tonight, and you?
Good. Doing well.
You guys are all getting around.
So we have this lovely fish odor in the basement that we're trying to get rid of.
This is opening exercise.
I did
So
make
while
sure
we're
that-
still in the opening exercise, can I make you the person who hands one of these to anyone who walks through that door?
Yes.
Okay.
More than-
After the opening exercise, you can forget it. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay.
I could give them need a bonus for
Or just make their night.
There you go.
Good evening. Is this microphone working well enough? Okay. I gave all of you a slip of paper and I didn't keep one for myself. No, I put the extras back here. All right, we're starting to talk about demographics. So for the last, I guess the first 4 lessons, it was very doctrine heavy, right? Understandably, because I wanted to lay a doctrinal foundation for being okay with talking about the topic of church culture. I thought the author did a good job, and now we're starting to turn to some practical matters, matters that might make us think a little bit more. As far as not so much necessarily the doctrinal issues, but the path forward for new life. So, on the topic of demographics, I have a texting conversation with classmates of mine. That's one of the ways we keep up with each other, and we ask each other questions when things come up, and so on and so forth, and talk through issues going on in today's world and think about how to handle them as pastors. And this is a text that got sent to the group that we have by a classmate of mine who's a pastor. And so this is what he had to say. This is from a guy with kids at our early childhood center. So he's a pastor at a church. There's other pastors there, but he's kind of one of the lead guys there that does a lot of the work, and they do have an early childhood center, so on and so forth. In fact, they had a school for a while, K to, or maybe it was 1st to 8, I can't remember, but it shut down a number of years ago. And then as kind of families moved back into the area where he serves as pastor, there are people asking for a kids program, so they started, and they're going to kind of grandfather their way up, right? Work their way up rather than try to open one K to 8 all at once. They're starting with early childhood center. So this is from a guy. This is the pastor speaking. This is from a guy with kids at the early childhood center. He's a non-member, and I asked him over a drink why families from the early childhood center don't come to our church. Here are his thoughts. Pastor, I was thinking about what we talked about Friday. If you want a way to attract a younger crowd, you could try creating a millennial environment. I know your days are already packed, but if you could find a way to make some sort of afternoon, evening service work, then I have an idea. You can make it a service based around stuff going on in the world of millennials, social media, culture, etc., and how it relates to God. You could make it a millennial-friendly environment if the church would allow. Bring your beer or coffee and let's talk about Jesus. And maybe let people know you'll have the game playing outside in an area with a feel free to check the score if your team is playing sort of vibe. Also, childcare during service is always a big plus, but I understand that's a bigger cost. So here's what we're going to do. You got 2 questions on that sheet. Open by speaking with the people around you. If you just want to do the 2 at your table, or even better, if you kind of want to turn chairs, those of you that want to make a slightly bigger group, maybe a group of, let's say groups 2 to 4, or 2 to 5, right? 2 to 5, since that's kind of how we're situated here. So, take a moment, discuss those questions. The scenario is laid out before you. Question number 1, how much value is there in the narrative of doing certain things to attract a particular demographic? And then question 2, what suggestions would you have for this particular situation? We'll give you a couple minutes.
So I think it's about right now, like the 21s to the 30s to the early 30s, that kind of range there.
I suppose again, if you're watching a game, doing everything else, the attention is
I got a sheet for you. Do you have another sheet?
obviously small steps.
Doing a little group work, working on this scenario a fellow pastor / classmate sent to me. So grab a table where you can turn around and interact with a couple people.
Well, the honesty probably maybe not in a good way.
I think the biggest thing is this would help build the relationship with the people. And
I'm ready to find out however you would like it, because you don't want to offend.
starting out.
I'm failing at this job, aren't I?
They're coming in over there.
Give me a couple more. Telling them what's wrong.
Doing a little group work. People can make note. If you haven't moved to question 2, it's a good time to start doing that. Let's give it about 1 more minute. All right, start wrapping up whatever thought you're on, please. All right, 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's bring it back in. All right, what'd y'all talk about at your table? For this first question here, is there much value in the narrative of doing certain things to attract a particular demographic? Thoughts that were spoken at your table? Yes.
I mean, yes and no. If you're going to go to one demographic, you're leaving out the other demographics. And there is something of value of worshiping with older folks, young families, middle-aged people. You feel that continuum of the church where you have a broad range of ages in your services.
I know what you're saying. I agree. When you walk into church and there's a broad range of ages and demographics there, it's a very encouraging thing. Yes. Other comments?
Could I make a comment on her comment?
Yes.
Talking about, you're including one but excluding another. We have 4 campuses. We could do something at that one and something different at this one. And then the demographic, if you will, to go to the.
What's wrong with trying to make it inclusive for everybody?
Well, I'm saying it can be inclusive, but it don't have to be inclusive to everybody at one campus.
We have had conversations about how do we specialize, right? What can each site be good at? So that's a valid thing. One of the things churches sometimes do is try to go in too many directions. Other thoughts?
I think that there's great value in reaching out to people in the context that they're used to. Be that, talk about culture, and here they're talking about sort of targeting an age group, the millennials. We had a little bit of discussion about what is a millennial.
My apologies. I always forget to clarify what that is because I am one. So.
But there's I think there's value in that because even as I have conversations with younger people, I'll take my young grandson who's 20 years old now. He and I live in different worlds. Okay, trying to connect those 2 worlds to have a meaningful discussion about what's going on in life, and to talk to some things that he may see as issues or I observe or try to offer him some of the value of things I've learned over the years, becomes more and more difficult in today's world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another thought or two on this one, and then I'll kind of wrap it up with some summary thoughts. Yes?
Okay. We were just discussing how this scenario is a great small group. Like, give this guy what he thinks would be best with the group he's familiar with. Maybe not call it a church service, but you're giving them God's word, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, he's there. And hopefully they'll grow and know they need more of that.
All right, I'll give some summary thoughts here. Thank you, everybody, for the thoughts. First off, there's research, whether or not you want to listen to it, but there is research that has been done in the world of marketing and advertising and targeting certain demographics that if you target an older demographic, you only hit the older demographic. If you target a middle-aged demographic, you hit middle-aged demographic and older demographic. And if you target a young demographic, you hit young, middle, and elderly. So you can take that or leave it. That just is kind of in the world of advertising and so on and so forth. But more so to this question, just something I found interesting, but to this question, it's kind of a balance, right? Kind of what has been phrased here, this gentleman speaking with my friend and classmate, he's looking for silver bullets, right? Can we all kind of see that? He's looking for the right thing to attract the millennials, and silver bullets are always going to have a limited effect, right? Not to say that there aren't things we should think through. There's some things maybe worth thinking through here. Younger generations, looking at kind of that big middle paragraph, having conversations around what's going on in today's world, things like social media, life online, culture, whatever it may be, how it relates to God's Word. Younger generations want to have conversations about those things. So how can we be getting that into our preaching, making sure we're getting those timely applications into our Bible studies? How can we be making sure we're helping people understand what's going on in today's world through a scriptural lens? So to look once again, another idea past the silver bullet, we had a comment that started to get at it. The comment or the thought here is getting people together to be in the same space as one another, right? And there are many ways you can do that. And if we're being honest, if you invite a bunch of millennials to something in the evening, do you think they're going to show up if they have kids? They're probably not going to show up, right? So you got to think through these things. Let's move to the next one. What suggestions would you have for this particular situation? We maybe already kind of got a couple out there, but did you think of some suggestions at your group? Yes.
I mean, looking at churches that are attracting a lot of people without compromising the message, what can we pull from them that we could also do? Like, is it outside the realm of possibility to take a space and make it into kind of your hangout space where you can have people come, not necessarily for church, but kind of like we're doing at summers, you know, coffee and study, and, you know, have someone there who can talk about God's word.
Mm-hmm.
What ideas can we pull from the big mega churches that maybe aren't giving the message that we are, but are still getting a lot of people there?
Thank you. Other thoughts? I'll try to not comment and let people get some thoughts out and then give a comment. Or I'll actually share my reply to him. Seeing no other hands go up, we won't belabor the point. So actually, my reply was kind of in line with what Lena just said, right? I watch out for the silver bullets. We kind of talk like that. We talked about that a little bit, and certainly there are things to think through in this reply, things that we can improve. Maybe they don't have to look exactly as was suggested, but a very general thing that I said was this: most beneficial thing that I've stumbled on is creating collision-rich opportunities and spaces, and then having a team where we have open conversations about visitor management. It works, but it's not an easy silver bullet. It requires a lot of work and maintenance. And then I went on to give a more specific idea, right? So if they have an early childhood center, a specific idea that I gave him thinking about, right? We talked about the placement of tables last time, reading from the culture book, and how more frequent communication is a very important thing. So that's where the collision-rich spaces came from, and collision-rich opportunities. So I said, do your people walk their kids in? What if every Friday morning y'all invested a little bit of money and you had, right, kind of like this nice coffee bar? This is actually in Austin, Texas. So it'll have to be a nice coffee bar, a nice healthy breakfast bar, right? Because people care about those kind of things. But it's an opportunity for when they drop their kids off, they start to recognize every single Friday this is here and pastor is there behind that, looking to talk with me, to hang out with me, to make me a cup of coffee, to offer me something for breakfast. So that's an example of, right, if you just throw out an event and say, hey, show up millennials, you're probably going to have limited success, right? But what if you look for another opportunity to better connect with those parents? Does anyone want to comment? Or do we think we're good here? Yes?
Well, I think the fact that he gave you suggestions, and then any marketing, you're kind of looking at, you know, what they need, it's more what they need. And we know the ultimate thing is they need to know God.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to be willing to hone in on what it is specifically that they're after, and then get into where they need to be. So the idea, and I said even back at Freedom's back in the day, that early childhood program, when those parents come in the door, you should be meeting them. You have that area where, you know, we have a kitchen or whatever, and so I really like the idea that, yeah, you have to build that relationship, and it's not going to be just a wave, it's a coming in and have a little bit of a discussion, whether it's about your child, which probably will start there, but then if you grow.
Right. Yeah. Standing and waving is a good start, right? Standing and waving every morning or as many mornings as possible is a good start. But how do we grow from there and create an opportunity in an environment where a deeper relationship can begin to form? Any other comments? Yes?
And I think that's all great to have the millennials together, but I think you're really losing the rich and valuable experiences of the older generation, who can answer a lot, who have kind of been there and done that. And I think maybe that generation, you can speak to this or not, but are looking for that. I mean, that's a, you know, they're their parents' age or older, and I think there's a lot of respect given to that older group, and it would be a shame not to value that and bring that information in God and life and all those experiences together.
Yeah. It's got to be that balance, right? I think young people do both want, just I think all ages, want opportunities to hang out with people in their demographic, right, their age group, but also where those opportunities where we can get different ages together. So it's kind of a both and, right, because there's value in both. Yes?
I feel like he's also saying here, I don't see church as being relevant to me. And maybe, you know, I mean, you've solicited his input. You gotta really show that you've done something with the input then, because otherwise, why reach out? So whether that might be, you know, maybe the millennials have specific questions that they'd like to see addressed in either a devotion or a Bible study or something like that. I mean, he threw out some really big things, but maybe he's actually thinking of something pretty specific.
Right, yeah. Certainly not a bad thing to say, hey, if we have people who are going to show up to this group, but you almost need a bridge, right, before you just jump right into to what this gentleman has suggested. You have to have done some pretty significant groundwork, right? And that's kind of where the idea of where are those relationships first, how deep are those relationships, and how do we form deeper relationships and create opportunities for more conversations. Yes?
I'm a boomer, but 20 years ago, what we did here, and I'll tell you, I formed so many relationships. We had 2 ball teams here, and it's amazing. You know, and there were some younger ones and some older ones, but for the most part, yeah, they were the same. We were all about the same age, all had little kids, things like that. But I know now, like some of my kids will say, gee, why don't we have anything like that now? You know, the different teams, a lot of the volleyball or things like that. We have bowling. You know, I just think something like that, you form those relationships, and then they do enjoy coming to church more, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you see their friends there, and it just kind of all falls into place. But I don't see some of that going on as much, and maybe that's an idea to try and get some of them together doing some type of team.
Yeah, I've definitely thought about that too. I think the thing we keep running into as well is how busy our world has become, isn't it?
Everybody needs a break.
I'm not saying we shouldn't. Not saying we shouldn't give it a shot, you know, but I almost wonder if rather than the church being the one that says, let's organize this, if an individual said, let's join a city league, right, and then went around to people within the church and said, I need you on the team.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder,
That's kind of what we
yeah,
did, you know.
right.
But, yeah, we had a sponsor and things, but it
Mhm.
did kind of come through the church, and, you know, like, the church maybe put money toward t-shirt or our entrance, you know, I mean, we did
Right, yeah.
some help that way, but, yeah, it was, and then, of course, sure, you go out afterwards and things, and.
Right.
But I think that really formed a strong bond with our members here. As I said, we were younger than us, so,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
almost your age.
We got to move on soon.
I know, this is sort of a sidebar, but I think you gotta realize that the people in the 20, 30-something age group, both mom and dad are both working, most likely full-time, and so their time is precious. So you just have to be cognizant of that. And when you're dealing with people like that and expect, well, why don't we have ball teams anymore? Who's got time to go play ball? I mean, it might be fun, but, you know, you've got your house to take care of and you want to spend time with your kids. You know?
Yeah, yeah. We're kind of at this point where you have to be intentional and almost force yourself, and I use that word gently, almost force yourself into someone's life to make a connection with them. Maybe just be persistent, trying to move into their life to make that connection, especially for younger generations that are busy. And one of our flaws is we do what we want to do and we don't do what we don't want to do. I think is that fair to say? Okay, it's fair to say. Shall we move on, or was there, okay.
Real quick follow-up on the sports thing, though, because I was here for it, too. If you were right, it was really driven by 1 or 2 people. Yes, it was a church thing, but it was really 1 or 2 people kind of drove that thing. As far as, who's got time for that, some do, that's the thing. It's not that everybody at 25 or 30 has, they're working full-time, they have a wife and 2 kids, and not everybody's like that. So not everybody in that age group would join, but some would. And that's where you start breaking that into, whether it's for a small if you're in Bible class on a Thursday night, or a small group that goes and plays volleyball or softball.
Right.
It can't fit everybody across the board in that age. It's gonna have to be smaller pieces and parts.
Right. Yep. All right, we're carrying on. All good thoughts. Thank you. Good things to wrestle with. Let's see. For some of these, we're going to do similarly to last time. I'm going to talk through a few so that we can try to cover a little more ground. Number one talks about engaging the culture here and now. The agree or disagree. Changing to engage the culture here and now is God pleasing. I'll talk through this one. It can be either or, depending on how far you take that, right? What exactly are you doing to engage the culture? Are you simply being a student of the culture and trying to meet that culture where it's at? Or are you taking it too far and overcorrecting, if that makes sense, and making the church look, you might say, exactly like the culture, which can be a dangerous thing as well. So that's one of those questions where there's kind of a balance. Yes, it's God-pleasing to engage the culture here and now, and we absolutely must, but you must also be careful as you do it. Number two, this can be one for all of us. Before a congregation can identify and implement the needed changes, it must honestly and adequately define the current reality. Why?
You can't get to where you want to go if you don't know where you're at.
Yep.
Anytime, you think about it, anytime you ask someone for directions to some location, one of the first questions they say is, where are you coming from?
Yep.
So you gotta establish that first.
Yep. Thank you.
And
Is there?
also, they won't be successful.
It won't be successful if you don't define the starting point.
Yep. Exactly. Other thoughts? To keep bringing us back to this picture so that we kind of adopt that common language, the picture of the healthy plants and the weeds, to think about it in terms of that. If you do not identify the weeds, are they going to go anywhere? No, they're not, right? If you don't identify and deal with the weeds, they're not going anywhere. They're going to keep growing, and they're going to keep you. They're going to suck your attention, and they're going to suck your energy and your time, and they're going to keep you from focusing on the things that you need to focus on. All right. So for this one, I did some that I'm going to talk through, some that we'll all talk through, and I also did some that you will talk through as a group because I recognized that it is getting darker earlier, and 8 p.m. is late for a Bible study by the time we get out of here. So we're going to keep doing a couple group exercises tonight. So number 3, talk about it. Back in your groups, this will be much shorter than the last discussion. So take about 1 to 2 minutes right now. How does the increased rate of change in today's world immobilize our churches?
How do you react to something that's that? Yes. And that we tend to not focusing
Let's keep doing it, but harder. That's not hard.
I think maybe the point is trying to, the lag is
All right, about 30 seconds left. Ten seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, somebody raise their hand. Tell me a little bit about what was said at your table / your group. Go ahead.
By the time you write a program today, it's already 3 weeks down the road. Now you got to rewrite the program and do it over.
Yeah, things in today's world keep changing so fast. It's hard to keep up. More thoughts? Yes.
also to make a lot of these changes, you have to think about the change management piece, where you're going to change, and then people are like, well, wait a minute, I like slow down the rate of change for us to implement too, because you gotta think of the people as well that are here.
Yep. Anything else? Yes?
Just a general consensus to get people to agree to the change in the first place. Which thing are we gonna change? So just getting that agreement sometimes is hard enough.
Right. Anything else? Yes?
Right, we did discuss the structure of how our church is built, like through going through one committee instead of having many committees working on different projects so the change can happen quicker. Because then it bogs it down, and by the time you made that change, it was the wrong thing to do.
Right.
It's just we have to mobilize ourselves structurally so that change can happen a little quicker.
Yeah. Structurally, you can shoot yourself in the foot, or you can help enable the church to change a little more quickly, or to say it another way, to get things done a little more quickly, right? We've probably all been in a situation where every single thing has to go through one bottleneck, right? And it slows things down very much. But talking about giving ministry away, which is a thing that's come up a number of times, right? Giving ministry away and equipping and enabling other people to do things, and then also trusting them to do those things. That's one thing that helps us be a little more mobile and a little more flexible. Let's see, I'll just give a comment here and then we can move on. Kind of where my mind goes when I hear this, maybe isn't even so much, it's maybe more societal. Just as Christians, we get, and I think I've used this phrase before and you'll probably hear me use it again, we get this kind of deer in the headlights syndrome. As we look at the world around us and we see politics going haywire, we look at the world around us and we see morality going haywire, we look at the world around us and we see all these things just hard to keep up with, hard to understand, hard to truly track what's going on, and we just kind of freeze. We don't even have conversations about how do we deal with it, what do we do about it, how do we move forward, what do we need to change, what do we need to not change, so on and so forth. Number 4. It can be disheartening to see signs that the epicenter of Christianity is moving away from North America. How might we reframe this reality in a way that invigorates us rather than causes us to retreat and give up? Don't think too hard. Yes?
Well, if you rephrase that sentence and change the word North America to Asia Minor, that would put us right in the time when the New Testament's written. And all of them churches that were big and very strong and invigorated, they're all gone today. But look at the legacy that we have from them. We've got the exhortations from Paul to them. So, yeah, while maybe moving away from us, we may be sending to the areas in Africa and Asia the good parts of us as well. So while, yeah, maybe this will be gone in 20, 50 years, who knows? The Lord will work even better in the other places that have never had Christianity.
Thank you. Another thought?
That motion.
Yes?
We have more mission work nearby than we've ever had before.
Yep. That's the glass half full way I like to see it, right? True that the cloud of the gospel moves. That's a conversation, the author brings that up in numerous places. At the same time, right, a message of Scripture is, as we see the signs of the times reminding us that Jesus is coming, it is to re-energize us to go out in a new way and with a new vigor and a new zeal. Good there? All right. Number 5. Number 6 is going to be group work. And number 5 kind of leads into it a little bit. So I'm going to talk through those. Number 5. If you follow along in the book, it's kind of on page 94-ish. The paragraph I highlighted that gets us there is, the book claims that a liberal world, it's at the bottom, the book claims that a liberal worldly spirit of accommodation to contemporary secular culture, characteristic of so much of Western Christianity, is to blame for the decline in Europe and America and the lack of vigor in Western churches. This is where that question came from. Every time, place, and culture has sins it is blind to. As individuals who live in a specific time, place, and culture, this includes us. list 3 sins that we are blind to as American Christians. It could be just about anything and everything that you see our society struggling with. In fact, just in the pastoral staff meeting today, we had a little bit of conversation about this very fact, right? How quick we are as Christians to point the finger at all the horrible morality in the world around us, and then yet what are the things going on in so many of the lives of even people inside the church? Materialism. Sometimes it's laziness in today's world. Sometimes it's idolizing comfort. Sometimes it's idolizing my own kingdom and my own little nest egg here on earth, and placing more in my earthly security than in my heavenly security. Timidity when it comes to speaking about God's word. Sexual sins being a huge one in today's world. So on and so forth. So all the sins that are culture, just as we talked about in Culture Sermon number 2, the disappearance of so many important Christ-like qualities, compassion, humility, grace, kindness, hospitality, right? And so often we let those sins and blind spots of the society around us begin to creep into our own lives as well. How do the sins that we are blind to hold us back from living out our Make Disciples mission to the fullest? Another one I forgot, but I should mention because it's a big one right now. Getting too wrapped up in earthly affairs, getting too wrapped up in this earthly kingdom, i.e. political matters. That's not to say don't keep tabs on them, don't be a good citizen, but it is really easy to run into that ditch. And before you know it, it's more important than God's kingdom. So how do they hold us back from living out our Make Disciples mission to the fullest? Simple answer, it ends up flipping our priorities. We get caught up in whatever that thing is that we idol, that is an idol to us, and that becomes to us a little god. And it zaps our time, our zeal, our energy, so on and so forth. Anything there, or are we ready for number 6? It's on a similar note. Revelation 3:14 to 22, that is the letter at the beginning of Revelation to the church in Laodicea. Of all the, and you can disagree with me on this, that's fine. It's simply an opinion. Of all the churches that I go through, or that you go through in the beginning of Revelation and you take a look at, for me, the church of Laodicea always sticks out as to kind of where in general, not in every case, but where in general the American Christian church is. See if you can list 3 things about the American Christian church, especially thinking about our circles. Take the challenge of applying it to our circles. That might cause Jesus to say, because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. So just as a reminder, that's kind of tied to number 5. So thinking about number 5 and number 6, and on that question, let's take just a couple minutes once again to have a discussion. Does that track? Make sense to everybody? Okay. 2 minutes. Don't have your resources?
No.
We had car trouble, so
I locked them in the vehicle at.
You want to
That's all right.
snap pictures with your iPhone?
Oh, yeah.
That's good. I was gonna run upstairs and copy them.
That's thinking, but we knew we were late, so.
We did, and the problem is that I locked them in the car at
That we
the
left at the
mechanics.
shop.
Okay.
We're all set.
Yep.
Okay. It's going all right?
I think so. Yeah. Trying to get people chatting with each other a little more this time, because I could tell people were getting sleepy last time.
Really?
But is that the right one?
I thought it
Yeah,
was
that is
good
the right
last
one.
time.
I think so, but I think just the 8 p.m., the earlier nights, you know. Is it going to work or no? All right. Thirty seconds. 30 seconds. All right, 5 seconds. I'm hearing conversations start to die down. 5, 4, 3, 2. All right, somebody raise a hand and share something that was said at your table as it pertains to this. Yes.
I said that, we're told not to talk about religion, right? That's impolite to talk about religion or politics, whatever. And so I think sometimes we do need to break the norm because it's sometimes relevant to the topic at hand and what people are talking about. So be a little bit more brave.
Yeah. If it's dear to us, act like it's dear to us. Sometimes we get a little lukewarm there, right? Thing to always wrestle with. Yes?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about, and this is evidence of lukewarmness, to honestly answer the question on Sunday morning, are you excited about going to church? Or is it just something I do because Sunday morning, I do doing that forever? If you had a major sports figure coming to speak at church that morning, people would show up and they'd be excited. But you tell them Jesus is going to speak to you, and they go, yeah.
Yeah. To back to our opening exercise here. Part of the conversation I had with my pastor friends and classmates was how easy it is to get 30s and 40s with kids to show up to a little music class or a little gymnastics class or a little Mommies and Me class, even if the church is running it, right? But Sunday morning, nope, I got kids, right? And I feel the pain. I feel the struggle. So, okay, yep, thank you. Other things that were said at any of the other tables? Was there another hand that was about to go up a minute ago? I think between a couple comments. Anyone else? All right, between a couple that I threw out there and a couple that y'all threw out there, since 5 and 6 had a similar pattern to them. All right, number 7, what is religious pluralism? Religious pluralism is kind of that thought that all religions are equally valid, all religions are essentially okay, and I'm going to take kind of a salad bar approach to religion, take a little from this religion, a little from this religion, a little from this religion. So just look at the word plural there is kind of your memory hook, right? It's all kind of valid, it's all good. And so we got to recognize that is kind of where we are in today's world. That is the society, and likely if we come across an individual that we're going to work with, right, they're probably going to have some notion of religious pluralism in their heart. So practically speaking, to just kind of simplify that, how do we work patiently with a culture given to religious pluralism? Not to essentially start every new relationship, every new situation with the thought that there's a decent chance, a growing chance, that the biblical literacy of this individual is 0 or very close to 0. And so I need to start there very gently and very basically in a certain sense and work towards a more deeper understanding. And just be aware that they're coming from a completely different point of view. Any thoughts to add?
How do you do that? How do you start off gently when somebody is saying, all roads lead to heaven? And give them the raspberries? I don't know how to address it.
I think in my mind it starts with, it depends on who you're talking about, right? If you're, I think we've talked about this before as well. If you're on the plane and that conversation comes up, go for it, right? Get into it, have a conversation, be kind and compassionate, obviously, but talk about it as best you can. Practice, right? It's an opportunity. If you just absolutely bomb, well, you probably won't see them again, but maybe something you said will stick with them, right? And your ego will recover, My ego will recover. But the person who, I think we've talked about in these terms before as well, the person who thinks, right, all things are equally valuable, all religions are equally valuable, think in terms of relationship. How do I have a relationship with this person so that this person sees that I care about them? That way, as we begin to have conversations, no matter what the conversation, I don't need to feel the pressure that one single conversation has to be perfect, firstly. And secondly, I don't need to feel I don't need to feel worried about, what's going to happen if this conversation goes wrong or if it does get a little tense, because there's an understanding between this person and I that we do have different viewpoints, but we're going to be willing to talk about it and continue to work through it. And obviously, you and I are going to keep looking for ways to work with them and to speak on more topics with them. Does that work?
Yeah.
Decent? Okay. Yes.
So sometimes we make assumptions about people, and instead of making assumptions, asking the questions to find out what they really believe, and then follow it up with, well, tell me why.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that would give you an opportunity to understand them a little better, and maybe part of their reasoning is based on, some hurt in the past or whatever, but you're going to also be more open to talk about it if you're listening to what they're.
Yeah. There are a whole lot of people walking around in our world that have been hurt by the church in one way or another. And when I say that, let's not just let our minds go to the idea that it's the mega church down the road or the whack church down the road who has burned people. Sometimes our churches do as well. Things don't always go right. And so there's a whole lot of people walking around. So how do we work to walk alongside them and build them up and give them a different friendship, a different Christian friendship? Yes?
Paul dealt with religious pluralism. Didn't he see a statue to the unknown God and say, what you know is unknown, I'm going to reveal to you? And he used the fact that they believed that there's something valid in every religion to his advantage, saying, you already believe that there's something valid in what I'm about to say. And so now they were at least willing to listen.
Yeah. It's a good example, that account of Paul accommodating the culture in which he was in. Taking the time to even walk around, to look, to think about this religiously pluralistic society that he was walking around in and try and engage them on those terms. Thank you. All right. We're on 8, yes? How does clinging to the status quo keep us from making the changes needed to reach people caught in our nation's rapidly evolving social, cultural, geographical, racial, and ethnic fabric? Did that paragraph and that question make sense to people? There's a couple yeses, a couple nos, and that's okay. We're still talking about how, let's see, what page is it on? Page 96. All right, so we're getting to national factors, just how quickly. Maybe the one that jumped out to me would be on the issue of racial and ethnic, right? The racial and ethnic makeup of America is changing and has been changing. We've talked before, one of the phrases we've thrown out, no longer is the world mission field overseas. More and more, it's right in our backyard, right? So if we're not talking about how do we reach different cultures, different races, different ethnicities than our own, then they're not going to just walk in our door. Very rare is it for them to just walk in the door and show up. So we have to be willing to think through those things. Anyone want to add something there? That they had something written down? Yes, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking about this because, we are a culture group, and you need to reach to another culture group. What I think I've become convinced that we need to reach across, give them the pure gospel, pure doctrine, and it's going to take leaders and first followers in that culture group to raise up a new church for that culture group. I don't think we can, I don't know if we can merge two cultures or become some sort of multicultural. I think it's gonna have to be, we just have to give them the pure word of God, pure doctrine, and they've gotta rise it up from their selves.
It's been done. Garden Homes Lutheran Church would be an example of a church that has become a multicultural church. But I do get what you're saying. And so my mind immediately goes to Spanish ministry, right? So often the mode of operation when it comes to ministry to Latinos is you kind of need an entry point, right? And so that's why ESL classes are such a popular thing. English is a second language. That's kind of your entry point into another culture, and you're offering second language courses, right? And it's a free thing you have. They show up, and that's where you start to build those relationships. And one of the churches I worked at while I was at the seminary, Trinity in Waukesha, I was actually part of doing those ESL classes, and it takes time to build that. And then I think maybe a year or a year and a half or something after I left, they were able to actually finally call a pastor to do full-time Spanish ministry, right? So
that is your side by side,
yeah,
where it's a separate culture group.
it is. Yeah, you're right. So often it does go that way to validate your point. Yes?
Isn't Freedom's multicultural? Don't Pastor Gordy give English and Spanish? Or am I wrong? Did I stick my head in the sand somewhere?
I don't give any Spanish services.
No? Okay, I thought
Unless he hasn't told me, I don't think Pastor Gordy speaks Spanish.
I don't know where I got that idea.
Also, I meant to, this isn't like a rebuke to anyone, but I've heard it. I haven't heard it for the first four classes we had, I haven't heard it, and so I haven't had to mention it. But here in this fifth class, I've heard it a couple times. I have a policy, it's called the swear jar policy. And if you say St. Luke's, or Bethany, or Freedom's, or Mount Zion, a quarter goes in the swear jar. Just so you know. You get a freebie. For people I work with, often it's up to like $5 now. So, but we're starting out with a quarter here, so it's all good.
Okay, I'll rephrase it. East Campus.
There we go. Thank you. Very good. It's been corrected, so you can have your freebie back in case you slip up again. Where are we? Are we on 10? No. 9. Okay. This is just one of the thoughts that rolls around in my brain, right? I often think to myself that many of the struggles our churches experience are less about the timeless content of our message and more about the packaging of that timeless message. How do we repackage the timeless message we have so people see it as more useful for helping them make sense of the current realities of their lives, as opposed to any other existing option, since that religious pluralism is still on our minds, right? So many people take, as we call it, that salad bar approach, and in today's world, you can quite literally fill your salad bar with the people you want in it as you're on YouTube or Snapchat or Twitch or whatever social media site it may be, right? And so often people fill with those encouraging spiritual things, and they kind of take what they want from all of it. So thoughts on that? How do we help people see that we have a timeless message that applies to every situation? In case you weren't quite sure, I'll give you one that immediately comes to my mind. For the pastor, it's making sure that we do the work and take the time to. How do we make sure that when people walk in these doors, the sermon has very real application for them? We need the law there, we need the gospel there, we need the doctrine there. But how do we make sure that they're not going to leave here without seeing how this timeless word applies to their life right now? Yes?
For me, it's this Bible study. It's Bible studies in general that allow you to see how the timeless word is used and understood by all these different people throughout the age groups that we have. I mean, to me, that's critical.
Yes.
Well, to COVID has fast forwarded some of the repackaging of this message. I mean, how many churches for the first time went online and did online services, or turned their Bible classes into online and stuff? I mean, I remember doing it at Bible class at my former church in Eau Claire because it worked out. They had it online. They were doing a Zoom Bible class. You know, the message never changed no matter where you were at, but all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're worshiping in Florida or you're worshiping in California or whatever, and you're hearing a different message from, a different thing. It's that repackaging of that, and I think that is what you talk about here is
Yeah.
how do we repackage it so that it's there.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Something that has come up in our branding meetings is thinking about the church as a brand. And you have to be careful with that because you're not really, you are kind of pushing a product, but that product is salvation and it's free. But, talking about how do you reframe it so that when you talk to people, you're framing the church as the help that they need in their story. And everyone is the hero in their own story. And how do you, as the guide, the pastor or the friend, show them, hey, hero of your story, here's the thing that you need to defeat that villain that's been taunting you, whether it's loneliness or heartbreak or an addiction or whatever. How can we brand ourselves as, hey, we're what you need, without losing the integrity of what we have?
Yeah, very good. So we thought long and hard about when the person who knows nothing about church or the Bible or God's Word, because more so and more so, that is the society in which we live, and it will continue to be more so and more so, at least for the foreseeable future, the society in which we live. When that individual drives past a sign that says, trying not to use one of our 4 swear jar words, drives past a sign that says St. Peter, right? What does that mean to them? If you have zero biblical literacy, it means quite literally nothing, right? Or if the name of your church is Gilead or Balm in Gilead or whatever, right? That means quite literally nothing to them. New Life, on the other hand, extremely scriptural concept. My favorite comment that I've gotten sometimes is, New Life sounds kind of New Agey, to which I always say, it's very scriptural. So anyone who tells you it's New Agey, you can take them to Scripture and show them what a beautiful scriptural, deep and rich concept that it is, right? But whether you're not a churchgoer or you do have some church experience, right? New Life communicates something to somebody. All right, on to the next comment.
Well, I was just going to say that I feel like this just means more and more that we should be sharing how it helps us personally too, because that can resonate with someone when you can actually be vulnerable enough to say, look, I went through this struggle, and the only way I got through it was, knowing I was forgiven, and, having the assurance that I find in the Bible and in my faith, and, being able to share that personally, I think makes that's how we can connect with people who don't know it yet.
Yeah, there is certainly, Paul quite often shared his story, right? Always being sure to bring it back around to Christ, so that Christ was the focus, but be prepared in season, out of season to give an answer, a reason for the hope that we have, right? And part of that is how that hope has affected our life. So certainly when I came for the one Bible study we had one Sunday here at Central, it was part of it can be a personal testimony, what Christ has done in your life as you keep the focus on Him. Was there a hand over here?
There's some things we can learn from the secular world probably, and to Lena's point, I know it's not a product, but in many ways it is. Marketing techniques are just a good idea, right? Know your customer, right? Know your product and package it to the customer, right? So that means we have to know the people that we're trying to minister to, and we have to know our own product, and we have to package it appropriately.
Yeah, not going to disagree.
For individual people.
Yeah.
Back to Sarah's point, I think it's very powerful. There's an old evangelism technique called your story, my story, his story. And in the world that we're living in today, where many people are anti-Bible, I mean, they've been
to what matters in your life. Show them that there's something that you've gotten out of this, and then take them to Jesus as the result. But once they see it in action in you, they're going to be more willing. And the first couple of times you do it, the old adage of leave a pebble in their shoe is all you can do. Is just give them something to think about, and then come back to it later again.
Let's take one more.
I was gonna say to the assignment you have in the back about visiting. I remember as a pastor, I had a vacation day and I went to Victory of the Lamb, and it was definitely not like my German Lutheran experiences of the past. Somebody opened the door when I came in for me. I get in and somebody else says, there's a coffee bar over here, why don't you come on over. I go into the sanctuary and somebody right away recognizes I don't belong here. And they come over here and say, we see you look a little lost. Is there any questions you have? And none of them talked to me about Jesus. None of them started giving me a story about how Jesus is in their life. Maybe they would have if I'd gotten to know him better. But just those, friendly little welcomes just really struck me as I was going home. Because I grew up at a church that looks just like New Life East, and I almost had to throw money in the jar there. And for me, I grew up at a place where you don't hug people coming into church. You don't. If you say hi, you say, oh. Closer to the German. And go in there, but there you still, all of a sudden you just kind of felt like they care about me, even though they don't know me. So
Right.
that's a way that I can package the timeless message, and yet I may not ever have to say the name of Jesus on my lips.
Right. Very, very different when somebody already walks into church because somebody invited them. The day is about Jesus, right? Pastor's going to have a sermon. The music's going to be about Christ. That's where they're going to get Jesus. When they walk in the door, warm and welcoming, right? That's a question to be on our minds. That warm and welcoming, that collision-rich space and environment. Was there another comment?
I have a comment.
Yes.
I mean, that's great once they're in the door.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that technique and the story, that's what you're doing outside
Yep.
church. That's
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you're doing at work. That's what you're doing with your friends. That's what you're doing with the family members. And that's what's needed to really, I mean, by the time they walk in the door, half the work's done, right?
Right.
For them to
Yep.
walk into the
Yep.
church.
Thank you for saying that. Sometimes when the train gets going, and I forget something, it's gone, right? So that was what I meant to say. Two different scenarios, right? By the time you walk into the church, totally different scenario than when you're working with a single individual or a friend trying to talk about some things. And there's a very appropriate time. Pastor Gordy walked into church that day, and somebody immediately walked up and started telling their story, right? He may not have come back. And I would think that's probably the same for last one. Okay.
It reminds me of something that was said to me in my college years. Is they said, as a teacher, you gather this bag of tricks. If this one strategy doesn't work with this student, then you try something else. And when you start out, when you're new, you maybe have like 3 tricks, and that's it. But as you teach longer and longer, and you observe master teachers, and you have more experiences, you get more and more things that you can do. And this conversation reminds me of that we can't just be the greeter. We have to have our story ready to go. We have to be ready to start a relationship with someone without talking about Jesus maybe in the first couple meetings. We have to, kind of be in that greeter mode maybe. And maybe we can't do all things. We have different gifts, but start to think about, is there more than one way that I can make?
Right. One of our recurring themes has been start getting comfortable with getting uncomfortable, right? And it's surprising if you commit yourself to continually taking little baby steps outside of your comfort zone. It seems painful and tedious, but before you know it, you look back and you're 10 feet away from that comfort zone, right? You're entirely outside of it, and you keep taking those baby steps to the bag of tricks illustration. All right, continuing on. Number 10, to put it quickly, we more so and more so, it's just about settled now, still an argument sometimes, but we pretty much live in a post-Christian nation now, meaning that either it is already the case or it is very soon to be the case, if the trajectory continues, that the majority of our nation is no longer Christian. So ministry is going to look different, right? You got to think about that in a whole lot of different realms. As we've already talked about, the individual you're speaking with, you got to not assume, you got to be intentional, you got to ask where they are. When it comes to working with kids in a school, you're going to have kids all over the spectrum as far as spiritual maturity, and more so, there's going to be less scriptural literacy at all ages. And so whether you're talking about a school setting or whether you're talking about Sunday morning, the question becomes more and more difficult. How do we have both to use scriptural terms, the milk and the meat present? Because you gotta structure everything as though you're expecting visitors to walk in the door. You gotta structure everything as though you're expecting visitors to walk in the door. So you need both the milk and the meat present. Is that tracking as far as things looking a little different in a post-Christian society? Okay. Let's read a little, and then we'll go on. So in this book, we've been talking about, I had you write down early on 3 things, and those were build safety, share vulnerability, establish purpose. In building safety, we've talked about things like belonging cues, making people feel like they belong, making people feel like they're safe, making people feel like you and them, or new life and them, have a future together. Those are things that stick with people. Now moving on to sharing vulnerability. Just something to put on our minds. We won't spend too long on it, but so far we've spent this book in what you might call the glue department, exploring how successful groups create belonging. Now we'll turn our attention to the muscle, to see how successful groups translate connection into trusting cooperation. When you watch highly cohesive groups in action, you will see many moments of fluid, trusting cooperation. These moments often happen when the group is confronted with a tough obstacle. For example, a SEAL team navigating a training course, or an improv comedy team navigating a sketch. Without communication or planning, the group starts to move and think as one, finding its way through the obstacle in the same way that a school of fish finds its way through a coral reef, as if they were all wired into the same brain. It's beautiful. If you look closely, however, you will also notice something else. Sprinkled amid the smoothness and fluency are moments that don't feel so beautiful. These moments are clunky, awkward, and full of hard questions. They contain pulses of profound tension as people deal with hard feedback and struggle together to figure out what is going on. What's more, these moments don't happen by accident. They happen by design. At Pixar, those uncomfortable moments happen in what they call brain trust meetings. The brain trust is Pixar's method of assessing and improving its movies during their development. Each film is brain trusted about 6 times at regular intervals. The meeting brings the film's director together with a handful of the studio's veteran directors and producers, all of whom watch the latest version of the movie and offer their candid opinion. From a distance, the brain trust appears to be a routine huddle. It's up close. It's more like a painful medical procedure, specifically a dissection that spotlights names and analyzes the film's flaws in breathtaking detail. A brain trust meeting is not fun. It's where directors are told that their characters lack heart, their storylines are confusing, and their jokes fall flat. But it's also where those movies get better. Brain trust is the most important thing we do by far, said Pixar president Ed Catmull. It depends on completely candid feedback. Just something for us to think through. I didn't necessarily have a question to go along with it, but as we move forward, where are those places where we can have difficult conversations? I can say that certainly the pastors and the leaders are working to do that. And that's part of that whole vulnerability thing. And maybe if there's a takeaway, it is easy for a church to get kind of caught in a feedback loop. And that is hopefully, as far as what I've seen, one of the things that we have worked very hard to break. by coming together as new life, right? It's no longer one entity, each island unto itself that kind of gets blinded to those things that really it needs some difficult feedback on. But now we're all at the table sharing that vulnerability, working to be more honest with our weaknesses, with the things that we need to do better. And this class is part of that. Anyone had a thought as they went through the Pixar thing that they care to bring up? Otherwise, it's just a picture to keep with you. Yes?
Just a reminder that you need honesty, and sometimes you don't mean to hurt somebody, but it will hurt them. And it's not because you're out to do that, it's just you're giving honest feedback.
Yeah. And it's you think about Pixar and where they share vulnerability, right? When we come in guns blazing and the culture is unhealthy, it's going to cause a blow up and a fracture and a split, right? When the culture is healthy is when we can start to have those difficult conversations and that honest feedback, right? And we can have that understanding because that relationship there is there, and we can have that difficult feedback. So it's kind of this balance because part of a healthy culture is that honest feedback, right? So it's kind of this balance moving forward. You can't just blaze on in with it. Any other comments? All right, carrying on. We talked about 11. I used it in the opening exercise. Younger generations, we thought about that just a little bit. Give me a moment to figure out what we're going to look at next. All right, let's do number 12. And I thought we'd do groups for this one, just to get all of us talking one more time this evening. Many churches in America are struggling, but according to Frank Page, it is not just because of secularism, cultural shifts, and changing demographics. Page points to faults within many churches. For example, being lifeless, boring, emotionally hollow, going through the motions of worship out of habit, and concludes, it's no wonder church attendance is shrinking and congregations across the country are panicked over what to do about it. Pick one item from the list above of faults within many churches, weeds, to keep bringing up that picture, and brainstorm how a congregation might go about dealing with the particular fault you picked. So quickly at your table, decide which one you want to talk about, and how might you handle it? How might you deal with one of those examples? Being lifeless, boring, emotionally hollow, going through the motions out of habit. All right, give it about 30 seconds. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, if you are willing, please raise your hand and tell me which one was discussed at your table and some thoughts that y'all came up with as to what you can do about it. Yes.
We talked at our table, we sort of focused in on boring and amongst a bunch of different ideas. One of them was that there was to use like mini sermons throughout the service as opposed to here's your 20 minutes, hope you can stay awake.
Right. You know that you're lucky you're in a Lutheran church. There's a lot of churches where the sermon goes an hour and a half. So I don't know if that means the problem is with the pastor or the people, right? But yes, to your point, I mean, how just think from our own experience, how moving is it when one of us shows up to even like a Lessons and Carols, and it's just a change of pace. And we've talked about this as we read through the John Hine paper, Compelling Christian Worship, right? To hey, maybe occasionally we're doing a handwritten liturgy, right? Similar, same structure. You're not throwing out confession and absolution or anything like that, but you're putting some words in there that make people think about it in a new way. And that does two things. It makes them think about it right then, and then when you come back to what you're used to, that's even a little fresher, right? Because you didn't use it the last week. So good thoughts to be okay and think about how can we incorporate in a proper and upright way some variety. Other thoughts? Yes.
Sometimes I just think it's the knowledge. We had a Bible class here that talked about the liturgy, where it came from, why we do it, and growing up Catholic, didn't read the Bible, so there were so many responses and so many things I didn't know were directly taken from the Bible, and I think then you're a little bit more engaged and you understand why we do what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, so to educate on why we do what we do is another good point, right? I have conversations with my classmates. I guess they're on my mind since we had this opening example, but where we talk about, we try to slip little things into the bulletin or to the service folder sometimes that maybe explains this piece, or we have little lines that we bring up every so often in the service, you know, to make the creed or whatever it may be a little more meaningful to people, right? So they understand, oh, there's a reason we're saying there's a point to it, or whatever piece of the service it may be. You can't do every piece every time, but to have a couple sentences that you even say from up front as to what is the purpose of this thing we're about to do, that kind of drives it home with people can be important, and especially if we're structuring for visitors, that can be an important thing as well. Yes?
We tried to tackle lifelessness and touched on variety in worship a little bit, touched on reminders that mission is ours to go take outside the church walls. We talked about small group activity as a way to invigorate a little life in individuals that way, and then community activity, which could include ball games or other community work to get them outside the church and say we're doing something together in a meaningful way.
Yeah, very good, right? Connecting, this is one we've been hitting on. Themes are rising to the surface. Maybe jot them on your to-do list, right? The themes that keep rising to the surface. One of the connectedness of our corner of the world has just greatly deteriorated, and to bring life back, we're gonna have to be really intentional with how we connect people, and it's gonna require some failing forward. You know, we all, I've done plenty of failing forward, and I'm only 3 years out, right? Done plenty of things trying to connect people, and plenty have fallen flat on their face. Was there one more thing?
Using more upbeat music, because everyone knows that, you know, like, it's like kind of boring. But if you use like stuff like I don't know, stay easy.
No, yep, very good. Thank you. Yeah, and once we get the new hymnals circulated and start using them, I know there's going to be some instant hits in there, right? And so we don't have to feel bad about talking about. There's certainly good rooted things that we never want to throw out, we never want to get rid of. But there are many people around us, and maybe even many of us in this room, who have craved some updates and a little more life, right? First time you sang "In Christ Alone," it was an instant hit in your heart and in your life, wasn't it? Now maybe you're sick of it because we've some of you, because you've sang it so much. But even then, right? When you forget about it for 6 months and then it comes up on Easter, you still get chills, right? Because it has that. Personally, and I'm not suggesting anyone else needs to do this, I always try and keep that last hymn to be one that is upbeat and one that is favorite, so that's the note that things end on. To your point. All right. We don't have that long. Is that okay? Can I move on? Okay. All right. I want to get to one more, and that is 18. While y'all were discussing, I looked at some of these, and we've touched on a little bit of them. This is my first time ever making a course like this, so some of these themes have circulated, but here's a fresh one for us to talk to. And it is going to prepare us for something that is coming up a little later, the life cycle of a church. Number 18, as a church declines, its dreamers and visionaries are typically some of the first to leave. Why? 3 hands went up. You haven't spoken yet tonight.
Frustration. They can't get things to change.
Frustration. The dreamers and the visionaries. Oh, I won't comment. I'll let other people.
I probably agree with that. That the vision, the dream that they work for doesn't come around, and they try 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 and they're frustrated and it's over.
Well, just they can't. They don't have like an outlet for the creativity. We would kind of go into more survival mode, like, no, this is what we know works, and we're going to stick with that because that worked for us 10 years ago, and there's no room for experimentation anymore.
Yeah.
What they said.
What they said. Frustration. Anyone got anything to add? I think I agree with all that has been said, right? Visionaries and dreamers like to move, and they get frustrated, right? And they like to say, hey, what are we going to do? How are we going to move this ship forward? Hey, visionaries and dreamers are some of the first to see that there's a problem. We're going to get into this thing called the church life cycle, and it's very difficult for a church to see that there is a problem in time to make the changes that need to be made, and it's kind of this downward cycle you get caught in, and we'll talk more about that. But visionaries and dreamers are often some of the first to sense it and pick up on it, even if they can't verbalize it, right? So they try to say we need to do something, even if they don't understand exactly why they feel that way. And then when it doesn't happen, they tend to be some of the first ones out and say, I'm going to go somewhere where I'm going to be listened to. So now the more interesting question, whose fault is this?
Always the pastor's fault.
There is actually a gentleman. Does anyone know who Jocko Willink is? Jocko Willink. He's got Pastor Gordy knows who Jocko Willink is. He wrote a book called, what's that leadership book we read? Extreme Ownership. Extreme Ownership. The concept of Jocko, and he served time overseas in the military, and he was in a leadership position, and things went sideways on a mission, and this is when kind of the concept dawned on him that it all comes back to the leader. So what you said is...
I didn't mean it.
What you said is actually a thought out there, right? It all comes back to the leader, and those come with some tough conversations as well. Where were we before you sidetracked us? Whose fault is it?
It's everybody involved in it, because the dreamer or the visionary needs to understand that about themselves, that maybe if they
take a serious look in the mirror and understand that about themselves, that maybe their roots aren't, they need to work on digging their roots in a little bit deeper. And being more determined, saying, this is where I stay, and if I need to work a little harder to get my vision across or to come to fruition, maybe I can do this. Whereas other people may need to be more open to hearing what that person is suggesting and, you know, absorbing that and working that into the culture of the church or the group.
Yeah. Well said. Anyone to add? Ben first.
I found the wording of everybody involved interesting, because I think it's everybody, and this is kind of a nitpick on it, and not even nitpick, but just an offshoot. Everybody not involved is also at fault because they aren't involved, and if they were more involved, then things would probably get growing. So it's not like the person who has the problem and the leader, it's everybody else in the whole group, even if you're not directly involved.
Yeah.
Fault is, I don't know, it's a word, it's situational. So it's the culture that church had been built upon, and it's the culture of the church. And once you shift that culture to always knowing that they have to continue to move with society, then you probably won't get back into that again. But it's hard work.
Yeah. For thinking about personality types again, and we're kind of wrapping things up here. Thinking about personality types for the dreamer and visionary types, when they see a problem and are put in a box, it's suffocating, right? It is suffocating and difficult. And I think so often in our circles, right, sometimes I had a professor who always called the visionaries and dreamers stallions, right, like wild horses. And sometimes we just kind of brush them off and say, no, instead of how do we come to the table here and talk about this? Because we lose something valuable when, so there's fault in both places. Suffocating the visionary, but also on the side of the congregation or leadership or whoever it may be based on the situation, needs to come to the table as well. Anyone got any closing comments? What are you going to put on your to-do list? Tell you what, you don't have to raise your hand. I'll give you 3 minutes, 2 minutes. I'll give you 2 minutes. Flip to the very back. And just reflect on tonight's class. Jot down a couple things on your personal to-do list. Also think of this as our to-do list. New Life is our ministry. So take a couple minutes to jot down a couple takeaways. All right, and then past that, I got one closing comment, and I forgot to give it at the beginning. As I reflected on our class last week, I realized something. I put the apple, remember the apple, the culture apple, for those of you who were here? I put it up on the chalkboard up there, and that's for how we as Christians accommodate culture. There's surface level culture, there's kind of the meat of the apple. We can accommodate those things, we can be flexible with those things, but then the core, that's where our values and our beliefs are, right? And we stand on the Word of God when it comes to those things. And I think we were mixing up that illustration with core values. Those are different things. Core values can change. Core values, in fact, I was just part of my wife and I's devotion this morning. We were listening to one of my home pastors back in Texas. He is district president of the South Central or whatever district, and he does online devotions. And he talked about having personal core values, not just for a church, but for your life. And of course, right, boil down what are the things that are going to be important to you and your family. We'll get to more things on core values. Point being, core values can change, and they are an important thing to think through. That's all I got. All right. Don't forget about your special assignment of checking out a couple different services and filling out that evaluation in the back so that we can start to think more like visitors. God's blessings. Y'all have a wonderful evening. Looking forward to seeing you next week.